The first new feature of C# 6 that we're going to look at is the using static statement. This allows us to import the static members of a class so that we no longer have to use the class name itself in order to access its static members. So let's first of all write some code that we would normally write in order to access a file on the user's My Documents. So let's create a variable called MyDocs, and we want to get the path to the user's My Documents. Now we could hard code that as a string, but that's really not the best way because users can change the location of their My Documents. So instead, we're going to use the environment class because it has a method called getFolderPath. And then we provide it a special folder value so that we can get the path of a special folder. My Documents is one of those. So that's environment.specialfolder.mydocuments. And that gives us the path to the user's My Documents. Then let's create another variable called path, and this is going to be the path to the file that we want to work with. And this is going to be a normal string building exercise in that we have the My Documents. We also need the character separator, which we could hard code, but I typically don't like to do that. And then we have the name of the file, which I'm just going to call file.txt. And then we need to supply the values for those identifiers within the string. So the first one is MyDocs. The second is path.directory_separator_char. And that is, of course, within the system.io namespace. So this will give us the path to that file.txt file that's inside of the user's My Documents. And then we would check to see if that file exists. And we would do that with the file class's exists method. We would pass in path. And if the file does exist, then we could go ahead and read it. So we could say file.readAllText and then pass in the path, and that will give us the contents. So this is what we have been writing for years. It works, and up until C# 6, there really wasn't a way to make this better. But now that we can import the static members of a class, we can get rid of a lot of this extra stuff, like, for example, the environment class. So we can import the environment class with the using static statement, and then we just have system.environment. And then we can get rid of environment inside of our code so that all that we do is call getFolderPath, and then we pass in specialfolder.mydocuments. And in doing so, we have instantly made this line of code a lot easier to read. So the next thing that we could do is import the path class because we have this directory separator char. Now, you could argue that this really isn't that big of a deal, especially since we're only using it once. But if we use this directory separator char in a variety of places, then it would make sense to go ahead and add a using static statement for that as well. So we could add using static system.io.path, and then we could get rid of path dot in front of directory separator char. So there we go, we've saved some time. And now we can also do the same thing for file. So once again, we can add another using static statement, but instead of system.io path, we will add system.io.file. And now we can get rid of file in front of exists and read all text. Well, there's one little issue with the using static statement, and that is if two classes have the same member names or signatures, then the compiler isn't going to know what property or method to use. Like, for example, let's add a using static statement for system.io directory, because both the file and directory classes have a method called exists, and the signature of this method is the same. It accepts a string argument. So the compiler obviously doesn't know which exists method to use, the one on the file class or the one on the directory class. So in this case, we have to be explicit here. We want to check to see if a file exists, so we have to say file.exists. But throughout the rest of our code, we don't have to be explicit unless if we run into another naming conflict. Well, there's one other use for the using static statement, and that is to import the extension methods on a given class. For example, I have a namespace called extensions. And inside of this namespace, I have two static classes. One is called string extensions1, which has a method called extension1. Then the other class is called string extensions2, and it has a method called extension2. So normally what we would do is just import all of these extension methods by adding a using statement for that given namespace. So using and then using static dot extensions, and then that would give us access to both of those extension methods. But what if we only want access to the extension methods on the first extension class? Well, we can easily do that by simply using static, and then we need our namespace, and then the class, which is the string extensions1 class. And then we can use that extension1 method as an extension method. So contents.extension1. And notice that extension2 is not there because we have only imported the static members on string extensions1. Now, yes, we could use that method as a static method if we wanted to. However, we typically don't. An extension method is supposed to be used as an extension method. So just keep that in mind. I really like this using static statement because when used correctly, it can really clean up our code.